Hi, I'm the history guy. Back in July, I was invited by one of my favorite museums to come and visit the United Kingdom, and while I was there, I spent a little bit of time walking around and looking at things, and have been slowly turning those into a travelogue that was originally produced exclusively for my patrons on Patreon, but as we've been taking some time off here and there around the holidays, we've been slowly bringing them to you, the YouTube audience. In this third installment in the series, we've made our way from Wales back to London, where we spend an entire travelogue on just one short city street. A street with an awful lot of history. If you enjoy, then please consider becoming a patron. Back in July, I was offered the extraordinary opportunity to visit the world-famous Tank Museum in Dorset and film an episode of their series, Top 5 Tanks. That episode has been posted, and if you haven't seen it, head on over to their channel and check it out. But the invitation also gave me an excuse to collect up a couple of friends who are also history buffs and explore a few bits of an island that is steeped in history of all kinds. A week is not nearly enough time to explore Wales, but I was missing Ms. History Guy and the History Cats, and it was time to make our way back home. But first we had an extra couple of days in London, where there's so much to see. And we did manage to find some history that was off the beaten path, or more fairly, on a well-beaten path, but often missed by casual visitors to the city. So let's talk about central London. In the 1530s, Henry VIII built a palace as a smaller residence the king could use to escape court life at what was then the primary royal residence at the Palace of Whitehall. The site for this new palace had previously been a leper hospital dedicated to St. James the Less, and so the new palace was called St. James's Place. While a secondary residence, the palace was important in Tudor times. Queen Mary I died in the palace in 1558, and Elizabeth I often stayed there, including reportedly the night of August 8th, 1588, when she was waiting to see if England would be invaded by the Spanish Armada coming up the English Channel. St. James's Palace was used as a barracks during the Commonwealth, but Charles II restored it after the restoration of the monarchy in 1660. Today, St. James's Palace is still a working palace and the residence of several royals, including Anne, the Princess Royal. In 1662, one of the well-traveled paths leading to St. James' Palace was paved, and that became St. James's Street. It's not a long street. It runs from Piccadilly Street down to the Palace, where it connects to Pall Mall, which runs just a few blocks over to Trafalgar Square. You can easily walk down to St. James' Street from Trafalgar Square. There's a lot to see in the area, and being an ancient city, there is history everywhere you go. The National Gallery and the National Portrait Gallery are just off of Trafalgar Square, and we were planning to visit, but first we wanted to check out a couple of other historical sites of interest. With the end of the austerity of the Commonwealth, the St. James's area, which is now the central district of the city of Westminster, really a borough of London that holds city status, became a fashionable district, and shops were open along the street to cater to the fashionable upper class. The area is still high-end, and being London, some of those original shops still exist. A regular tourist visiting the city might be interested in the shopping on St. James's Street, but it is easy to miss how historic the district really is. For example, D.R. Harris & Company Limited is at 11 St. James's Street. An apothecary shop. You can get fragrances, soaps, shaving, skincare, and hair care products there. It's a lovely shop, well worth a visit, but it is interesting not just because of what it sells, but because what was originally called Harris's Apothecary has been selling those kinds of items at 11 St. James's Street since 1790. But we didn't come to St. James's Street to buy perfume. We had another couple of shops in mind. My buddy Brad, who loves tanks even more than I do, had a specific interest in a little shop just a few shops down at 19 St. James's Street. Brad is an aficionado of an activity that likely dates back at least to the 10th century. Brad enjoys a fine cigar. Tobacco was a New World thing, and there is no known record of the actual invention of the cigar. We do know that tobacco was being cultivated and used in the Americas well before the arrival of Europeans. There's a piece of Mayan pottery dated to the 10th century that depicts a Mayan puffing on what appears to be a cigar, suggesting the practice predates Columbus by at least some 500 to 600 years. Although the etymology is not certain, it appears the name cigar was derived from the Mayan word for smoking. Columbus discovered tobacco in Cuba, but it took some time to reach the Old World and then was limited by a Spanish monopoly on Cuban cigars. Tobacco first came to London in the mid-16th century from Florida and was subsequently popularized at the court by Sir Walter Raleigh. Londoners became so addicted to the stuff that London became known as the smoking capital of the world, and tobacco shops opened all over the country. A man named Robert Lewis opened a tobacco shop in 1787 at 19 St. James Street. But Londoners didn't become fond of cigars until soldiers brought them back from the Napoleonic Wars, getting them from their Spanish allies during the Peninsula War between 1807 and 1814. Relaxation of tariffs made cigars more affordable, and they became quite popular, starting around 1820. The popularity of cigars to Londoners is perhaps best summed up in the 1886 poem The Betrothed by Rudyard Kipling, which concludes, "And a woman is only a woman, but a good cigar is a smoke." James J. Fox opened a tobacco shop in Dublin in 1881. In 1947, his son Freddie Fox opened another shop in London, and in 1992 the company acquired the Robert Louis shop at 19 St. James Street. Now called J.J. Fox, the shop at 19 St. James Street has been a tobacconist constantly in operation for 232 years. It bills itself as the oldest cigar shop in the world. That's the sort of place you can find on the streets of London. J.J. Fox runs the cigar departments at Harrods and Selfridges and has received 8 royal warrants over time. They still continue to supply cigars to the royal household. Their customers have included Emperor Napoleon III, Oscar Wilde, and of course, perhaps the UK's most famous cigar smoker, Winston Churchill. Churchill was, according to the store's cigar consultant, Philip Shervington, a customer of the store for 64 years. In addition to the walk-in humidor, where we fear we might never see Brad again, the store has a museum in the basement, named after Freddie Fox, the son of founder James Fox, who built the business substantially and passed away in 1990. The Freddie Fox Museum is in the basement of the store and open during store hours, Monday through Saturday. It includes a number of historical pieces the shop has collected in its 2 1/3 centuries of operation, including this box of Winston Churchill's cigars and this chair, where Sir Winston sat when he picked out his cigars. Of all the Winston Churchill history in London, this little-known shrine to his famous habit is perhaps one of the most personal. Interestingly, to show how times have changed, J.J. Fox's shop is one of the few public places left in the United Kingdom where you can still legally smoke indoors. But while Brad was oogling Sir Winston cigars, I had another shop in mind. As viewers of the History Guide know, I am a fan of hats. And just a few doors down, at 6 St. James Street, you can still buy a bowler hat from the store that invented the bowler hat. The story goes like this. In 1676, during the reign of Charles II, a hatter named Robert Davis opened a hat shop on St. James's Street. 10 years later, a merchant named George Locke imported coffee as well as chocolate and tobacco from the New World, and he sold them from a coffee house he established at 6 St. James Street. In 1747, George's grandson, James Locke, became apprenticed as a hatter to Charles Davis, who was the son of Robert Davis. In 1759, James married Charles Davis's daughter, Mary. Having inherited both the hatter business and his grandfather's coffee shop, James Locke moved the hatting business into the shop at 6 St. James Street, and they have been selling hats at that shop ever since. Locke & Company describes their hat shop as the world's oldest hat shop, and the shop is still owned by descendants of James Locke. Okay, let me gush a bit. This is not just a hat shop. It is history. Horatio Nelson bought his famous bicorn hat, or cocked hat and cockade 7 1/8 full, from this shop. Nelson, famously fond of a fancy uniform, was recorded visiting the shop in September of 1805 when he settled his accounts. The next month, on October 21st, Nelson was killed during the monumental Battle of Trafalgar. The statue of Nelson on top of a column, which dominates the famous square named after that battle and not far from the Locke & Company shop, portrays Nelson wearing that hat. In 1849, Edward Coke, the younger brother of the Earl of Leicester, went to Locke & Company to request a type of hat be made for the gamekeepers on his brother's estate. Locke & Company has sold the hat ever since. They call it the Coke hat, after the man for whom it was designed, although it is more popularly called a bowler. In 1882, author Oscar Wilde bought his famous black fedora at Locke & Company, but because of his imprisonment in 1895, he was unable to settle his bill. When Winston Churchill was married to Clementine Hosier in 1908, he was wearing a silk top hat made by Locke & Company. He later bought his famous Homburg and Cambridge hats at Locke & Company. He is often photographed in Locke & Company hats, smoking cigars that he likely bought at what was still then the Lewis Tobacconist shop, just down the street. In the 1930s, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. rented the room above the shop. His estate included several Lock and Company hats. It is a little-known bit of history that His Majesty George VI, by the grace of God of Great Britain, Ireland, and the British dominions beyond the seas, King, Defender of the Faith, and Emperor of India, had a really big head. I don't mean ego, although with a title like that may have at least somewhat been the case, but like physically, he had a large head. That was a problem when his daughter, Elizabeth II, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of her other realms and territories, Queen, Head of the Commonwealth, Defender of the Faith, was crowned on June 2nd, 1953, because the actual crown, called the Imperial State Crown, was too big for her head. The crown is part of the crown jewels, and most anything dealing with the crown is won by a jeweler, in this case by the crown jewelers Garrard and Company, but sizing headwear is a Lock and Company speciality, and they worked with Garrard and Company to create the fitments for Elizabeth II. The wooden block representing her head still sits in the back of the shop. When John and Jackie Kennedy visited London in 1961, Mrs. Kennedy bought a riding hat from Lock and Company. Today, Lock and Company holds royal warrants from the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Edinburgh, and British royals are still often seen wearing Lock and Company hats. It is difficult to overstate the history of this more than 340-year-old family-owned business. When you think of a hatter, you quite likely think of a particular hatter, a character in Lewis Carroll's 1865 children's work, The Adventures of Alice in Wonderland. If an author was going to base a character on a hatter, where else would they go but to Lock and Company? James Benning, the Lock and Company shop manager at the time, was said to be the inspiration for the character of the Mad Hatter. So there I was in front of the world's oldest hat shop, and I really came down because I wanted to take a picture, but I was determined not to go inside because I was afraid if I went inside Lock and Company, I would feel compelled to buy a hat. And while that sounds very cool, it seemed like such an extravagance to spend 500 to 1,000 quid on a hat in a time when people don't really wear hats anymore except for maybe ball caps. I mean, I didn't need a new hat. Really, I didn't. So let me tell you what it's like to buy a hat from Lock and Company. This fellow, whose name is James, is a master hatter, which is a title you rarely think about, but if you're buying a hat from Lock and Company, you'll definitely want the services of a master hatter. Lock and Company has quite a number of classic designs, but I went for the Coke hat because, you know, they invented the thing, and it is, I am told, an ageless style. James explained that one with a lower crown, like the one that Alan Pinkerton was photographed wearing, actually cost more because that's a custom design, but I was really looking for the classic style anyway. The Coke hat, or bowler, is not a soft cap, but a hard hat. That means that properly fitting the hat is more than just a matter of finding the hat size. For a soft hat, you can just run a measuring tape around your head, but for hats that are stiffer, the hat fits much better if it is conformed to the exact shape of your head. In 1852, the French company Ali Millard patented a device called a conformateur, which, along with its partner, the 4 million, allows the hatter to customize the hat to fit the unique shape of your head. James told me that no better device for the purpose has ever been invented. The conformateur is placed on your head, and the fingers of the gizmo are pressed around your head. Each of the fingers is attached to a pin at the top of the conformateur, and moving the fingers moves the pin. The pins press together and create an exact replica of the shape of your head, and a piece of paper is pressed over them, creating a sort of punch card of the exact and surprisingly weird shape of your head. That shape is cut out and placed in the 4 million. It's important to keep the center line straight. The nuts on the 4 million are loosened and adjusted to meet the shape we got from the conformateur. This creates a hat block the exact shape of your head, fitted to your hat size. The 4 million is then placed inside the appropriately sized hat, and the hat is steamed and pressed to match the shape of the hat to the shape of your head. While James was steaming my hat, I got to look at the walls of the room in the back, where the store has framed the head shapes of famous people who have bought their hats here. Like this one. I was very disappointed they didn't ask me to sign my little paper head shape thing. I guess I'm just not important enough to be put on that wall of fame. Just yet. So that's my travelogue for this month. Just 2 shops on a London street. 2 extraordinary shops. The next time you're in London, I really do suggest taking some time to walk down St. James's Street. London does a good job of marking all sorts of historical points, but it's still far too easy in that vibrant and modern city to miss the history that's all around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.